Welcome to session 1 for Unit 501, Managing People. In this session we're going to examine managing multiple and remote teams. So the aim for this session is to know how to manage multiple and remote teams. And by the end of the session you should be able to describe the challenges of managing multiple teams, explain how technology can be used to overcome challenges when managing remote teams, analyse strategies for managing multiple teams, explain how to monitor and maintain performance of multiple teams, and explain how to monitor and maintain the performance of remote teams. Managing a team in a single office or a single location is totally different to the situation of managing multiple teams or remote teams. It's not just a case of doing more of the same. You may need to sort of transform the way you work to meet all the needs. Managing these sort of teams can create challenges, and it's easy to underestimate the time and effort that you need to put in to be effective. You need to invest in achieving some sort of union across all the teams or the organisation, but you also need to cater for the unique needs of each of the teams in each of the locations. A failure to recognise the differing needs and the communication strategies that could be needed can lead to a compromise in efficiency, performance, and ultimately a sort of breakdown in working relationships with these teams. Specific challenges will exist for each situation, and that will be based on the culture within your organisation, the environment the teams are working in, the different individuals, and the experience of the manager, the teams, and the organisation. But there are some common challenges. We're going to look at 6 to managing multiple or remote teams, and we'll look at some ways to tackle them. The first of those challenges is that we need to make sure we're engaging all teams. We may think we are, but we need to be careful. If we have a single team in a single location or in the same location as us, those natural unstructured interactions happen as a matter of course. But when we have a multiple team or remote teams, we need to make sure that they're all in the mix and there is no unconscious sort of bias that can develop where the sort of manager unintentionally focuses or favours a certain team. It may be the closest, it may be their original or their primary team, but they all need to be offered the same opportunity. We need to work harder to make sure that we don't see any disengagement of any of the particular teams or any of the particular locations. And even if it appears to be a team that's working well, performing well, we need to make opportunities for that team so that we can connect and collaborate with them, and let them collaborate with the other teams as well that they've got interactions with. We need to ensure that all staff at all locations feel part of the larger whole, and have the opportunity to share practices, share experiences. It could be as simple as regular contact by phone or by email, contact with the other team leaders. It'll be individual to the situation, or it could be us traveling to those locations on a regular basis, but we need to make sure that we're focused on engaging all of the teams. The second challenge is to prevent tribes forming. What I mean by that is we're trying to make sure that everyone maintains a single vision across our multiple teams or our remote locations, and that takes constant effort. We presume that everyone is going in the same direction, has the same vision, but often it can not be the case, and everyone starts to have their own agenda, their own plan, and yet that could work in certain situations. However, the trick is that everyone stays as one tribe, and although they have their own style, their own agenda, they still have a sort of loyalty to the overall organisation. We need to foster cohesion, maybe trying to hold some sort of way of overall organisational meetings or overall organisational information where they get the picture of the whole organisation and see where they fit in. And it's about trying to find that way to link everyone in so that the separate tribes don't form, that they don't feel they're on their own. It could be periodically getting everyone together. If that's not possible, it could be about them all receiving the same information or receiving the same training and development program. The challenge is to keep everyone focused on the same mission statement. And it doesn't matter how good your systems are, if you don't make some effort to keep people on the same sort of journey, even if they're following a slightly different route, they're probably going to end up in different locations, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen if we're going to be successful. Thirdly, we need to ensure we're recognising different cultures, particularly relevant when we're talking about remote or different locations. For example, when working across different countries, it could be languages, laws, customs, and business needs to make essential adjustments so we can operate effectively across those different boundaries. However, we pay little attention half the time when it's about different teams, because they can have little differences that can arise between departments and teams. Cultures in one location or one team can have developed over a period of time, and it may be seen as acceptable to use one type of behaviour in one team, whereas it would be a bit of a culture shock in another team. Also, other things that could arise to make those different cultures could be types of employment. One place could be working on part-time, someone else could be full-time, another team could be permanent, another team might have temporary contractors or consultants or freelancers, or maybe on 0 hours contracts. What is acceptable to one group might not be seen as acceptable to another, and we need to make sure that we're recognising their different priorities, working patterns, contrasting approaches to line management, etc. We need to be aware of these different cultures, whether we're in different countries, UK locations, or establishing new or old teams, or different types of contracts. Next is about balancing consistency with local adjustments. Whilst we may have a feeling that it is best or easiest to have consistency across our management, regardless of the location, the team, the role, there is some sort of wisdom in allowing different locations or teams to adapt to their local environment. There will be certain areas where we'll have to have consistency. It'll override local situations. That'll be things like equality. There may be elements where it's quality or the risk is the main factor. However, we also want to encourage innovation, the use of the local expertise within that team. And then the best approach may be to just have a looser framework that can be consistently applied. But the individual teams, locations have the freedom, in fact are encouraged to fill in the gaps to meet local circumstances or local situations, as long as overall objectives are being met and the framework is being adhered to. Another challenge is managing and monitoring performance. Where employees are less visible to you, regular supervision is not as simple, is it? It's quite tricky. Furthermore, when people are remote from you, just because they're quiet, you can't presume that everything is okay. And obviously building trust is going to be key to that. You also need a formalised regular communication, clarity of expectations so that people know when and how the communication is going to take place, and trying to get face-to-face meetings even with those remote workers is key. It may not be regularly happening every week, say, but you need to have set times when you have face-to-face communication, because you need to build relationships with those people. And someone once called it building up social capital, because everything might be going right, but there could be stormy times ahead. And if you've built up that relationship with them and you've got time, you've taken the time to get to know them, then when you have a problem, it'll be quicker to work through it. So building up social capital, maintaining communication is key to that performance. And probably the biggest challenge is maintaining communication, maintaining effective communication. As we said in 5, communication is essential, particularly when you've got remotely or long distance relationships with people. Nothing beats that face-to-face meeting, but it's not always possible. But we have a lot of technology around now, and it's developed greatly in this area. We've got things such as Skype, WhatsApp, FaceTime. Any formal video conferencing sort of facility helps us to give that face-to-face element. Now, having had experience myself, sometimes for staff it's quite hard to start using it, and it seems strange, but work with it, it can be a massive advantage. There's also cloud computing, sort of intranets and management software now, apps that allow us to interconnect with people and update things from multiple locations and in live time, and there's a psychological thing to feeling more connected if that's a live system that's been updated by multiple people. Much of this digital communication now allows us to share things simultaneously, and that makes people feel that they're in the loop, that what they're doing is being recognised by other sorts of areas. So make something like that a bedrock of your sort of connection with those teams, and plan a structured, frequent and sort of proactive communication. As I said, it sometimes needs to be exaggerated, really, when you're in remote locations. It might not be a lot, it might just be a couple of minutes, but there needs to be regular times when people get into a routine of knowing when they will communicate with and how they will communicate with people. It could be as simple as recognizing people's achievements. It could be regular updates. It could just be to have a chat. But if we pay attention to communication, then the distributed workforce won't be so disjointed. We have to make sure that it isn't disjointed, because if it becomes disjointed, it will become ineffective. People, as we said, will go off in their own little tribes. And it's increasingly important nowadays in business, when we're having more joint ventures, we're having more partners, we're home workers, freelance people, people on different sorts of contracts, and people are not just distributed geographically anymore. They're distributed, as we said, culturally. They're from different trades and professions, but all having to work together, and it needs to be coordinated if we're going to produce, as an organisation, a solution that our clients like. So what strategies can we put in place to try and meet these challenges? Well, I'm going to go through a couple of others. It's hard to give specific details because of different situations, environments, like we talked about, location, the maturity of the team, what the skills mix is, etc. We'll look at some general ones, but there's also a lot more in the resources. There's articles about geographically dispersed teams, managing multiple teams, and bits and pieces. And there's a video of someone speaking about managing people across different countries, if that's something that particularly fits into your situation. So use those to research, but we'll cover a few sort of common strategies and things that we can do to try and mitigate some of those challenges. And the first strategy is about trying to create an environment where there's less leadership. I know that sounds strange, but as a leader, one of your goals is to make each of your teams work well together. If they're working well together, they're going to be more effective and more successful. And one thing you can do with multiple teams is to try diminishing the leadership, reducing the direction and oversight as the team becomes experienced and mature. When you're there, you're working with them all the time, and trying to work more. You haven't got the time to work with all of them and keep the same level, so you need to start relying on them more and getting them working better together. So over time, you must build trust in that team and reduce your leadership. We said if you've got some sort of framework in place, which is our next one, then that's easier, but it's critical that you develop people and make sure you've got the right people in the right places to do the job. And we're going to talk about talent management and recognizing those people later on. The next is something that we've mentioned already briefly, and that's about a framework, or other people call it a charter, that everyone will work to. People think they need consistency, but maybe we need to produce something slightly looser, a framework that they can all work to, adapt for local situations, different cultures or roles. The framework can outline how they're supposed to perform and behave to meet the desired outcomes, their objectives. They can adapt to achieve them. They can behave as is required within their organisation, but they still remain accountable. And the framework can be used for audits, for checking outputs, for targets, goals, and it's a strategy just to manage how they're going to go about their daily business. Next, we need to be creating or promoting transparency. Having this framework or charter is looser than having sort of consistent tight rules, and hopefully therefore should lead to innovation and a cooperative relationship. People are more likely to share ideas and their ways of working and how they're going about things if they're within this framework and charter, if they feel safe, and therefore prepared to sort of share their ideas. It's about you making sure that everything's transparent and they feel comfortable in that environment. Next is about this communication strategy. You need to stay connected and be available, even though we're talking about diminishing your leadership. That doesn't mean you're not communicated. You need to stay connected, understand the individuals and their different strengths and abilities, so that you can work with them to know what motivates them and fulfill their needs. They still need you, even though you're diminishing your responsibilities. You need to be approachable. You need to be listening to all their concerns, so that you can help them sort of utilize the framework and compete and make sure everything is still running smoothly. So you could have standardized catch-ups, weekly updates, and progress reporting will help, as we talked about. If you're using online stuff, the cloud, etc., stuff that people can multi connections to, it makes it easier, makes people feel more involved. You need to know the team, know what their strengths and weaknesses are, know their desires and their needs, what motivates them, what their environment is like, the different ways they're going to need to navigate through it, what their culture is, what the makeup is, all the bits we discussed before. So it's just about making sure you know your teams and keeping on top of it. So 5 strategies we can try there, things that we can try to put in place to manage multiple or remote teams. But furthermore, we need to encourage the understanding and appreciation of that shared responsibility and workload in each of those teams. That's a regular characteristic of what they call a high performance team, and we're going to look at that in the next session, what makes a high performance team and how we get that. But it's about making sure we support the team from within and letting them build, and that will work with your diminishing leadership. That will work with everybody understanding how they can meet the framework or charter. If it's clear and it's open, then everyone will understand that this is how it's being done. If there's regular communications to support that and help that, and if you know your team, you'll know which ones can do the support from within and which ones need more. And it'll be a balance across those strategies. It's not going to be, as I said, it's not going to be the same for every situation. And the more stuff in the resources, and then we'll be doing an activity where you can start looking at how it might work with the teams you have. And just before we move on to the activity, I think there's one thing that's worth a little mention, and that's monitoring performance of multiple and remote teams. We're going to look more specifically at techniques for performance management in this unit in session 2, but with multiple or remote teams, it's not like managing a team that you're with all the time when you can see what's happening, you know what's happening, you're on top of things. In multiple teams, it's more about management by objective. And as we talked about a framework, it's about them, as long as they achieve their goals and meet their outcomes within that framework, then great. They need that flexibility to maneuver in their situation, their environment, to achieve what's required of them. Yes, we might do audits on things like quality, efficiency, whether they're meeting regulations or still within the framework. Yes, we may be tracking outputs and achievements, but we're not going to be looking at it in a step-by-step process. The sort of things that we might use with multiple or remote teams are weekly updates, weekly reporting, and that could be through software solutions or conferencing, as we sort of briefly talked about before. They increase that interconnection between the teams and letting know everyone's achieved and where they're achieving. And then we might have day-by-day communication or week-by-week communication, whatever is agreed in our communication strategy, but it needs to replace that natural communication that would be going on so that we can make sure the team is still focused, that they're still working towards that common goal, and that they still feel that they're part of that overall organisation. And that although you're diminishing your leadership, your oversight, you're still there when it's needed. So let's have a look at the activity. Right then, this activity. So you're going to be looking at your team's management, the teams you have and where you monitor their performance. So you've got a lot of resources, as I said, that you can read and see which bits sort of fit with your situation, whether you've got teams in multiple locations, whether you're dealing with multiple teams within the same location, or whether you've got remote workers, remote teams. So look at what and how you're monitoring, the frequency and when you're doing it, and how it is used to make improvements. So what do you use from it that you can make improvements, and look at the way that they're performing. There's a worksheet. Complete the worksheet, make your notes and upload it, and it'll be useful for you when we get to the end of unit assignment.